So today we're going to meet a woman whose life suddenly started to make sense when she made a massive discovery. So Jane McNiece spent 45 years not knowing why she felt different from other people. Then she discovered she was autistic. Jane's written a book about her experience and she's here to tell us a bit more. Good morning, Jane.
Morning, Paulette. Morning, everyone.
How are you? You look lovely.
Oh, thank you.
You really do.
I've got a little bit of a cold, but outside of that, I'm good.
Good, that's good. So what made you think you might have been autistic then? Did you actually think about that?
Not at all, in actual fact. And ironically, I'd worked in fields of work where really that information I would have expected should have passed my way. I had no indicator until I found it by accident, which happened during lockdown 1. And I guess our journey started with my son. Our son was 6 at the time, and he was displaying behavioural challenges, and me and his dad would have described them as meltdowns. And after one of his meltdowns, Stephen did a bit of research and he said, Jane, I think Oliver's got ADHD. And we started pursuing that. We spoke to school and we spoke to our GP. And during that kind of journey, I was speaking to another parent at school, and the parent told me about her family experience, and she pointed me in the direction of a Facebook page, and it was a parenting support group. And one morning I was scrolling through the page and I came across a post, and the post said autism in girls. And around it had 23 symptoms, and I literally went round those symptoms and went tick, tick, tick. And I did what I feel is quite an autistic thing. I grabbed an A4 sheet of paper and a pen. I scored each out of 10. I wrote my rationale for why I felt I met that criteria, and I scored 219 out of 230. Some of them I was off the charts. Now, that sits alongside a backdrop of someone who has spent a lifetime searching. I don't think that's always been totally evident, but I've experienced for my entire life anxiety. It never goes away. It kind of undulates in the background. And I've had that from my earliest memories, sort of the age of 3. And I was diagnosed with anxiety disorders, but they never felt right. They felt like they didn't fit. And I've now learned that anxiety disorders are in fact episodic. They go away. You shouldn't live with them forever. Same as depression. They are neuroses. They are episodic. And I believe if someone has these in a very permanent way, then we need to explore why. So on the back of my little sort of pseudo self-assessment, I sought out a professional because I'm not qualified to diagnose, and it needed that clinical judgment. And on the 22nd of June last year, at the age of 45, within 5 minutes of being in the assessor's room, I was told I was autistic. Now, on the back of my own diagnosis, 2 months later, my 26-year-old daughter on the 8th of September was also then diagnosed autistic. And on the 2nd of December, our son, who had really sort of started that journey, was also diagnosed autistic.
So for you then, let me ask you about, because you talk about the episodes of anxiety, you know, the undulating, you said, this sort of never going away, this underneath the surface of your life, this anxiety. Were there any other things that you thought, maybe I need to be looking into this? Was there anything else in you that you saw, that you felt?
There was always that sense of I didn't belong. I didn't know what groups I fitted into. I've always questioned, what class do I belong to? There was always this kind of search for who I was, and always a sense that no matter what, I was never good enough. And I think what we tend to find is in late diagnosed people, we're endlessly searching. We just don't feel good enough. We just don't feel we belong. There's almost a sense that we observe the world, but we don't participate within it. And we will try very hard to. We will overcompensate for that. We are high achievers. We tend to collect accolade that demonstrate our worth. Very often things like compliments aren't so effective on autistic people. We look for something tangible. So we normalise high achievement. And we hide in plain sight, especially the girls. Because of the stereotypes.
I've read about that. Well, we're going to continue to talk about this. You have written a book as a result of your experience. We will talk a bit about that as well. Jane McNiece is with me. She spent 45 years not knowing why she felt different from others. Recently had a diagnosis of autism. We're going to talk a bit more about that and about the language that's used around being autistic as well. We'll do that after 4 non-blondes. Jane McNiece, who's my guest, is a blonde. So you are one non-blonde among the other 5, which is a bit of a funny way of looking at the situation, but that's where we are. So we're talking about your recent diagnosis of autism, aren't we? Jane, and how it led you to write a book. I've got so many questions for you, though, because, you know, we were having a little bit of a conversation about this, and I was saying to you that, you know, when you talked about trying to find yourself, and I was talking about, you know, my ethnicity, the fact that my parents are Jamaican, came to England, had me. I was always in a bit of a minority. When you're going through puberty, you feel a bit different. You talked about anxiety. We all have a little bit of that. How did you know that these just weren't natural things for you? You said some of these things, you know, the things that make you feel different, some of these things made you realise that you couldn't quite fit. You couldn't find a reason for that. You kind of gave me a really good answer to that, because I was thinking, well, how do I know that I'm not autistic?
Yeah, I think for a long time I talked myself out of the challenges I was experiencing and thinking, well, everyone experiences life challenges. And I kind of dumbed down my own suffering and challenges, and I think one of the things the diagnosis has done is legitimise that actually the gastric problems I experience are a very common coexisting condition that is linked to autism. I now know the reason for those. I now know the reason for my relentless anxiety, and the reason it is so very permanent is because it's linked to my brain type. It won't go away any more than I will change my brain type. So I'm someone who will live with managed conditions. The autism itself does not disable me. I'm not disabled by being autistic. I just have a different brain type. But I am disabled by the gastric problems that I have to take medication for, the anxiety that never goes away, and also a society that has been built by neurotypicals that hasn't been built for neurodivergents like myself. So I'm having to try and fit into a society that doesn't fit very well. Square pegs and round holes is what we often talk about.
And I think often, especially if you're a high achieving person with autism, autistic person, often, you know, you're not picked up at school, are you? Because you're functioning well, you're doing what you should do, you're getting your qualifications, so nothing's flagged up. Is that right?
Very often, and if we look at the diagnosis rates of girls versus boys, you're looking at about 4 to 5 boys who would be diagnosed for every female that is diagnosed. And I think the challenge is that a lot of the assessments and a lot of the stereotypes have been focused on how autism will present in boys, misunderstandings about behaviour, and when you actually look at the female presentation of autism, it can be very different. We call it the female phenotype, and in autistic females we do have obsession still. We have collections. They don't typically look like train timetables, but they might look like something with maybe a bit of pink to them as such. So we still have all the different autistic traits. They just present in a female form. And there will be, of course, some males who present the female form of autism. An example would be girls are more likely to socially mask. Boys
Which is what? Tell me a bit about socially mask.
So social masking is a mask that we create that mimics neurotypical people. So we will have an eye for detail that is way beyond what many neurotypicals will experience. And we will observe, we will watch the way you flick your hair, we will watch the way you speak, you dance, how you present yourself, and we absorb that. We've got good long-term memories, and we create a mask that matches that. I've got a number of different masks. I'm a mental health trainer. I have a mental health training mask. I have masks with certain people.
Is it exhausting, that?
Yeah, totally exhausting. Many autistic people will always be tired. We're contradictions, though. We are contradictions. I last month ran the London Marathon for the National Autistic Society. Running does not tire me. People do. And even if that is a positive interaction like this one, it is taken from my energy supplies. So what happens is after that I have to decompress, and if I don't get that decompression time, then I am prone to burnout. Autistic people are much more prone to burnout than neurotypicals.
And I suppose, how do meltdowns then connect with that? Is that where the meltdowns come from with children then?
Yeah, sometimes people have meltdowns. Sometimes they have closed downs, which kind of go a bit more inwards. Mine are more closed down, but my 9-year-old son, Oliver, our son would tend to have a more outward display of his meltdowns. And to the untrained eye, it might look like a child who is just misbehaving. It might look like a spoilt child. We often feel that internalised sort of judgment as well from other parents and carers who might just give us the side eye, shall we say, when we're out in public and that is happening. So it can play out in so many ways, but it's usually when that child or adult has just reached a stage of overwhelm. They've depleted their stocks.
Yeah. Jane, you know what, you were here to talk about your book and we've only just got to it, and I've just looked up and it's 1:30. I can't believe it. So why did you decide to write this book? And The Umbrella Picker, where does that come from as a title?
Okay, so I've always had a desire to write a book. I'd never ever thought it was going to be this book. After my diagnosis, very quickly I felt that I needed to educate others. I needed to let them know that there are differences. This is how it presents in females. But I also wrote it in a way that if you were a lost girl, now we've been titled by the media the lost girls because we are a missed generation of women.
To be called that?
Sometimes I can feel angry. I can be angry that the system missed us. We've calculated across the three of us that we've been exposed to well over 100 health, social care and educational professionals over our lifetime. I worked in mental health services for 3 years. Never once did anyone say to me, do you think your challenges could be explained by you being autistic? No one ever said it about my children either.
We're going to continue to talk about this. I'm going to keep you, if you don't mind, for another 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Is that all right? I am having a good old chat with The Umbrella Picker author, Jane McNiece. We're talking about autism. If you want to get in touch and talk about your experience or someone you know's experience of autism, you can do that on 0800 111 49 49.
BBC Radio Sheffield.
I'm absolutely having the natter of a lifetime here with Jane McNiece. So she's written a book called The Umbrella Picker, and part of Jane's story is that she was diagnosed only recently with autism. That's more or less it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you've decided to write a book about it. So in this book, you talk about your experience of motherhood and of grandparenthood. I'm looking at you now and I can't believe you're a grandparent. But that's part of your story, isn't it? And you talk about that experience, how connected to autism.
Yeah, if you look at our family experience, our family dynamics, it might seem quite sort of unusual on paper, but now with the diagnoses, we actually understand that they can be explained through the diagnoses. So I became a mum at 19, quite young, and I was quite maternal even sort of well before that. The circumstances just didn't make me a mother sooner. And I had my last child at 40, and my daughter had her first child at 16. I became a grandmother at 36. What we've learned is that when you are undiagnosed, when you are lost, you will seek identities elsewhere. And I think both myself and my daughter sought an identity in motherhood. We thought if we make ourselves mothers, we will fit in, we will belong with other mums. And I generally see a pattern that autistic people, when they're undiagnosed, will seek an identity somewhere.
Where? Which kind
the
of
kinds of places might include gang culture. They might include maybe online eating disorder communities, self-harm communities, motherhood. I question whether how many teenage pregnant mums are actually undiagnosed autistic, but they're seeking an identity elsewhere. If you don't have an identity, you will search endlessly for it. Your self-esteem will be low because you can't learn to love yourself or to value yourself if you don't know who you are. It's fundamental. Most of us have an understanding of our identity. Some of it is visible, some of it we learn about ourselves over time.
Some of it we create as well, I should imagine.
Some of it we create, absolutely, and we're more likely to create it if we don't know our fundamental one. And if you think about brain type, my brain type is how I see all my other identities. It's how I see my ethnicity, myself as a female, myself as a mum, as a wife, as a business owner. It is the fundamental part that I was missing. When I think about the language around autism, I say it, I am autistic, and I'm actually proud because I searched 45 years endlessly for that.
Because people say she's on the spectrum or he's on the spectrum or he's living with autism or what's the best language around that then? Around
we would
autism?
always advocate a person-centred approach. I would always say ask the person in front of you, but generally speaking, the patterns we see in the autistic communities, most autistic people will say I am autistic. They don't typically say I have autism. They don't say necessarily I'm on a spectrum or I suffer from autism. We don't tend to use that language, and I think the misunderstanding with the spectrum is that it's a line with high functioning at one end and low functioning at another.
Because people often say that we're all on the spectrum somewhere.
Yeah,
what do you think about that?
It's a myth. If that was the case, autism wouldn't be a thing. it'd just be a normal part of the human condition. It's like me saying, I've had a big meal, I feel really bloated, I'm pregnant. No, you either are or you're not. And actually, to hear comments like we're all a little bit autistic devalidates the 45 years of suffering. It devalidates the mental illness I've experienced and things like suicidal thoughts as well. It takes that away and devalues it in a massive way. So it's really important to help people to understand autism as well.
So what do you hope people will get from your book then? And did I ask you about why it's called The Umbrella Picker?
You did, and I'll come back to that. If I don't forget, as an autistic person, I sometimes have executive dysfunction, so I forget the short-term stuff. So do remind me. And I've gone off track now.
I asked you what you think people will get from the book, what you hope people will get from the book.
The ultimate hope is to find other lost girls and boys, because there are men there who are lost as well. And I've written it in a way that if you were lost, hopefully by the end of it, you would find the mirror to yourself. And I've done it. That was the purpose of the book, because I don't believe the system can find us. It's not educated enough about autism to find us. So we get bunched into mental illness boxes very often instead, with misdiagnoses in many cases. So I've written the book so that a person can self-identify. And I need to be clear in saying self-identify, not self-diagnose, because we're not clinically qualified to do so. And even in my own case, I self-identified in less than a minute, with less than 90 words, but I didn't diagnose. I had to go and find a clinical professional then who could do that next step. And not everyone chooses that next step. It's individual choice. But I do find that for many people who have, it's been incredibly helpful to have that final, yes, this is me. So yeah, I've written the book to help people to self-identify, but also communicated what it feels like to feel lost for 45 years.
And raising awareness as well around that. So The Umbrella Picker then, why that title?
Why is it called that? Yeah. So The Umbrella Picker goes back to when I was about sort of 2-3 years old, and I used to go to a little wool shop in Thorn. I grew up in Thorn with my mum on a Saturday afternoon. And in the shop they had the kind of paper bags on a string, and every time they pulled a paper bag off, it left one of those little corners, and over the course of the week the little corners used to drop on the floor. And when I used to go in on a Saturday afternoon, I used to collect them up, and they just nicknamed me the Umbrella Picker. Now that collecting of sort of detritus from the floor is my autistic need for decluttering. I struggle with visual clutter. It prevents me thinking effectively, and there was a need for me to kind of clear that up and to pick that up, and I still do that. It's an autistic trait, an autistic obsession I have, but I mask it out when I'm amongst other people. I don't do it.
So that'll take effort then, because naturally
effort,
you want to do
the
it.
urge is there, but I hold that back. But when I was 3 years old, I'd not yet learnt to socially mask. I was my true, authentic, autistic self. What I'm trying to do now at the age of 47 now, is to strip that back. Now that's really difficult when you've spent half a lifetime learning to mask, to survive in a world not built for you. So for me now, my journey is, how do I be authentic? I don't fully know if I've got enough years left, but I do hope that I can make a difference in finding other people and maybe helping them earlier in their journey, perhaps.
It's a step at a time, isn't it? It's been incredible talking to you,
Thank you.
Jane. Jane McNiece, author of The Umbrella Picker. Thanks for joining us on BBC Radio Sheffield. It's been really interesting and very enlightening. And if anything Jane has said makes you want to contact us and talk about your own experience, please do that. You can text us on 81333. You can WhatsApp us 08000 321 333,